Let's talk about eating carbs when you're trying to lose weight with intermittent fasting. Now, somebody recently wrote and said, I've noticed that in a lot of the success story videos that you do, people are cutting carbs in combination with intermittent fasting, but you did not cut carbs. And what do you think about that? And basically, I think that you don't have to cut carbs in order to lose weight with intermittent fasting. I think a lot of people do that. They have success with it. And I think whatever works for you is what you should do. But I do want to talk about why I don't cut carbs. I still don't cut carbs, and I'm pretty stubborn about eating the way I eat. Like if you were to ask me what is my normal eating like, I would say it's relatively high carb, probably relatively high fat, and moderate protein, if anything. I don't really have any rules for myself in regards to that. I do know that if I eat a just really high carb with no real fat and no protein, I don't feel great. But I do eat a lot of carbs, like biscuits and gravy, probably once a week, spaghetti with meat sauce at least once a week, and at pretty much every meal there's going to be a good amount of carbs. Rice and beans is another meal that I eat pretty frequently. And the reason why I eat this way is because, when I looked back on my life when I was about 30 years old, I realized, all of my weight struggles, what my normal pattern was I would try to cut out, things out of my life, like, cut out carbs from my life. And then I would lose weight. And then, what would happen? I would, once I got down to a weight that I was happy at, I would start eating carbs again. Or, if I cut out cake and I started eating cake again, the weight would come right back on. And so I thought, I have got to figure this out. I have got to learn how to eat all the food and still be able to lose weight and keep it off, because I knew that all these foods are going to come back into my life eventually. And so then what happened was, because I learned that I could eat all of the food, while I was going along, I was losing weight. I was just practicing intermittent fasting. I wasn't cutting carbs or even counting calories. I was just eating the foods that I liked. And when I allowed myself to do that, I suddenly had stopping power. Once I finished eating, I was full and I was satisfied. And that was a very different experience compared to like in the past, where I've tried to be restrictive with myself and say, well, you can't have cake while you're trying to lose weight. Like it just made me kind of miserable. And I had a lot of trouble controlling myself around those types of foods after I finally allowed myself to have them once I got the weight off. So this was a very different kind of experience. But now the entire time I was doing intermittent fasting, and I think this is a reason why a lot of people do cut carbs, is right now that's the popular thing to do. That's what everybody talks about. To hear a lot of people tell it, it's like impossible to lose weight if you're eating carbs. And I've just found that that's not true for me at all. In my opinion, the more important thing is that, you basically have to burn more than what you're putting in your body. So whether that comes from carbs or protein or fat, you have to be in some sort of deficit in order to lose weight. And this is actually one big reason why I started this channel, because so often you hear like you have to cut carbs in order to lose weight. Like if you want to have a prayer, you have to cut carbs. And I found that was not true, because, that wasn't sustainable for my life. And I think for a lot of people, it's not sustainable. So that's why I do what I do. Now, you may be sitting there thinking, maybe you're just a freak of nature. Maybe everybody else has to cut carbs in order to be able to lose weight. But, one thing I think that's really interesting is they've done studies of old order Amish. And so the way they eat is that they eat a lot of refined sugars. They eat very high fat. They move a lot though. And their obesity rate is 4%, but the prevalence of obesity in the general population of America is about 36%. So I think there's a disconnect there. What it appears like to me is the important thing is the moving more. On average, an old order Amish woman walks about 14,000 steps a day, which is exactly what I walk. And for Amish men, it was 18,000 steps a day. So, in my opinion, it seems like there's some evidence there that says, carbs aren't the enemy, that, even cake and pies aren't the enemy. And there was also another study that was interesting that compared the cancer rates of Amish versus the American population, and their incidence of cancer was much lower too. But, even all that being said, for me, what was really important was getting the weight off and figuring out how could I keep it off? And just knowing myself well, knowing that if I tried to, say, well, I'm just going to eat low carb, that's not going to work for me for the long term. So I would encourage you, whatever, works best for you and whatever you truly believe, because I think that's another thing. If you're truly convinced that carbs are bad, then you really shouldn't be eating a lot of carbs because you're going to be stressed out about that. But if you're like me and you think, well, there's nothing wrong with eating carbs, then I say, go for it. It's what's worked for me. Thank you for watching that video. I hope you found it useful. And if you'd like more information about intermittent fasting, head on over to my website, 6milestosupper.com, and you can find tons of information on how to lose weight sustainably and keep it off for good.